Alright, in the past lessons of this course, we have been generating a few different cliff models. We ended up caching one variant per frame, so it's now time to texture that. We are not going to use any UVs and try to take advantage of Houdini's tool and the Megascan library. So first thing, make sure you create an account on Quixel Megascan and download the Quixel Bridge app. So I purchased a few materials like rocks and grass, but you can also find some for free, like this one. You got a whole section of free content if you want to give this tutorial a try. So yeah, definitely check this out if it's not already done. So I purchased a few materials. We have in the surface a couple of rocks, some layered cliff that I guess come from Iceland. So first thing is that in export setting, you will need to download a plugin depending on where you want to send this material. In this case, Houdini, mine is already installed, but make sure it's properly installed if you haven't been using it. And we have some settings to export the textures and models. Same in download settings. We should first check this out before going to the export setting. And if you try to export, it's not gonna work straight. You first need to go into the Megascan plugins and make sure it's running. Also, I'm changing the material type to Redshift Triplanar so that it's exporting everything as a combined triplanar. So let's export this one. We're gonna take maybe this one. So I'm basically gonna export a bunch of them, try them out and see which one we'll be using. We got this one that could be interesting. And some grass. So I'm gonna use some wild grass. It's probably this one too. All right, let's go back inside Houdini and we can see that it's been creating a bunch of nodes for us. So that's fantastic. So for the scale of our scene, those values might be a bit too high. So let's decrease the size of this triplanar. And yeah, we'll tweak the displacement later. Actually, I'm gonna put that to 0.03 for the grass. And actually, let's set a color for this node just to make it more visual. That would be wild grass A and wild grass B. So that's all our rocks. And for all the rocks, I'm gonna go in there and change the scale to something like 0.01 and increase the scale to 10. Right, from here we could create a color correct. I usually like to add it in case I need to tweak real quick the albedo inside the IPR. And as we can see, this node is basically a container for all the normal maps, roughness, and so on. So that's pretty handy. And we're gonna do the same thing for all of the rocks. Just speeding up this part is always the same thing, applying color correction, tweaking out the scale and the displacement. All right, from here you can go back to the object context, take our cliff and assign the material that we want to try. So let's say Icelandic jagged rock. So here are the different results I got. This is wild grass A, wild grass B with a lower scale. I usually like to render different scale and particularly the lowest one, because even though it wasn't meant to be that big on a model, higher frequency would result into a lot of repetition on the texture, as you can see. And all the trick is going to mix those frequencies together to get a seamless look onto the model. So more Megascan materials, and I might try use some of them into the setup, so we'll see what fit best the look. This particular material seems like a fairly good base to start with. It has some interesting color and displays variation, so definitely adding that one as my favorite. So let's grab that guy and we're gonna copy its node into our main cliff shader. So that's what we've been starting. And let's create a network box and we're gonna call it Rock Cliff A. All right, so I'm gonna set up the scale to something very low and then I'm gonna create a max on noise. So I'm gonna generate a mask based on this noise so that we can mix our Rock Cliff A with something else. So let's try a different type of noise and VL noise maybe. Let's make sure we apply the cliff shader we did. Yep. And okay, let's go back in there and render view. So by default it's very bright. Let's increase low clip and increase the overall scale. That's much better. Could refine playing with high clip and probably try different type of noise. So the Nike noise got some interesting breakups in my opinion. Could stretch it in Y like so. And that might be a good base for a mask. Let's see, what else could we change? Try to balance the black and white level. And let's see with more octave. Yep, that would work, I think. Right, let's go back to the graph and we're gonna add low frequency to its name. Let's copy past this network and we're gonna call it mid-frequency. Rock Cliff A mid-frequency. So in there we're gonna basically double the size of this guy. Something like 0.014. And we're gonna blend them with the Eris Material Blender. So if you're using another engine, that's totally fine. You probably have similar system of layers. And let's plug the weight to the max on noise. Actually gonna create a null that we're gonna call Rock A Mask. Let's apply the same color to remember it's the same type of material. And render view. Alright, so we haven't plugged the displacement yet, but in terms of color we see some decent variation at the moment. So that's a pretty good base. And let's set up the displacement with a similar system. So it's a displacement blender. Let's connect the displacements and the weights. Okay, let's plug that into Redshift Materials Displacement. And let's make sure the scale is like around 14 or so. And let's render again. So we definitely see some displacement going on. If it's not appearing, make sure that enable tessellation on your object and enable displacement is on. So let's compare with the initial test that we had. And we can see that the breakups are definitely helping. We don't see too much the pattern going on. So that's pretty cool. I'm kind of thinking about remapping a bit the values so that it's not too dark. Might also come from my lighting, but in that case, the base might be a bit too dark in my taste. So increasing the gamma to 1.1, something like that. Yeah. Let's compare. Okay, working for me. All right, let's go back to the graph. We're gonna duplicate this node from the Rock Cliff A low frequency. Let's make some room and let's increase the scale. We're gonna actually use the displacement and mix this input with a color composite. And let's plug the base color from the initial displacement. We're gonna change the composite mode to add. And we're actually gonna create a mix so that we can mix the initial displacement with the composite version. Right, so in the amount, we're gonna use another mask. And so let's duplicate this max on noise setup. And in here, we're gonna change a bit the scale so that it doesn't look exactly the same. Could also play with the offset to bring variation. And we plug that into the mix amount. So let's render the view. So the displacement might be a bit strong in some places now. We could compare. Let's add a snapshot. Yeah, so it's a bit funky really. It might help if this displace wasn't so strong. So we're gonna contrast a bit more the mask first. And also we need to change the output color. In this particular setup, the black will reveal more of the original displacement. So let's just decrease color 2 to 0.5, something like that. So we should have half of the displacement now. Yeah, that's a bit more subtle, really. Okay, I'm kind of thinking we could potentially increase the frequency, not in this one, but yeah, that particular layer. Let's try again. Let's take a snapshot. And yeah, we definitely got some higher frequency going on. And I think the displace is a bit too much and tends to mess up the scale, so we're definitely gonna reduce that. All right, let's move on. We're gonna go back in the graph. Let's rename that properly, like high frec. And so this displace was too strong. Let's reduce it, like 0.4. So we're gonna bring one more layer of rock. So I was particularly interested in this cliff material. We're gonna see. Let's paste it and add a network box. We're gonna call that rock B. And let's connect it to the displacement blender and also to the material blender. Everything is organized properly. We're gonna create another mask that's gonna be color purple, something like that. It's gonna be rock B mask, and let's change some features so that it doesn't totally match the other noise that we had, and plug that into the blend color and into the displace weight for the rock B mask. Okay, so displacement is 10, the scale should be all right. Let's render. Okay, we definitely see some interesting variation, and I'm gonna decrease the saturation to fit a bit more my other material. It might be also a bit bright. We should probably reduce the level scale at some point. And I'm gonna tweak a bit the scale as well. So that was fine. Maybe the initial here was a bit too low. And all right. Let's try again. Yeah, definitely better, I think. So this new layer is a bit too bright, so let's grab the color correct, and we're gonna reduce the level scale to something like 0.8, maybe 0.7. And yeah, I think it's a better match now. So just gonna do some quick changes. This mid frec was a bit too low in my opinion. Okay, let's take a snapshot and compare. All right, that's pretty subtle, but I think that might help. Let's keep going. Back to the graph. We're now gonna work on the grass. To do so, we're gonna build a custom attribute with my mask builder tool, which is an HDA that I optionally provide into the Gumroad page of this cliff course. So as you can guess, we're gonna call this attribute grass, and let's enable the slope feature. Now let's play with slope min and max angle to isolate the slopes on which the grass is gonna be located. Because it's an attribute, we'll be able to use it either to control the shading or the scattering of other Megascan objects. So now that the slopes look good, let's enable the height. So it's gonna allow us to mask the ground. I don't necessarily want the grass to grow so close to the water, so yeah, let's get rid of the ground. Adding some turbulence and stuff to get some breakups. This way we don't have like a uniform gradient, but more like a noisy gradient, so that might be a bit more interesting. Could also enable some noise feature to bring some breakups. Let's increase the scale and probably contrast a little more. So this min and max input is pretty helpful to clip the values like what we have in a maximum noise. All right, I'm pretty happy with that. I'm gonna temporarily hide it, and we're gonna start adding some map breakup. So I'm gonna grab a custom texture, And we don't have UV, so let's auto UV that this way. It's just a basic top projection. Could play with the UV scale and the position to try to find a better breakup. Oh, let's just change it for now. Yeah, something like that maybe. Inside the remap we could contrast it a little more. Actually gonna change it, so not really, not that one. Probably a mask like that. It could be interesting. Alright, let's bring some finishing touches and let's reverse the values. So min to 100%. Okay, so that can be an interesting breakup. Let's maybe combine it with the noise. So this noise might be a bit too blurry. Let's contrast it a bit. So for me, this tool is very helpful to save time on setting up attributes. You're not forced to use it. I mean, if you're more comfortable using your own setup, that's totally fine too. So now that we got a grass mask, we're gonna bring it with the material. So first, let's copy the grass wild B, and we're gonna pass that into the cliff shader. Let's create a network box. I'm gonna set it green like grass. Ooh. Okay, we're gonna plug it at the end of the material blender. And in here, we're gonna connect at the end of the displacement blender. Okay. We're gonna import the grass attribute into a RS user data scalar. Let's call that grass attribute. And let's create a null. As usual, I'm adding a null because if we need to combine or do some operation with it, at least we have some room. And let's plug the weight and the color blender to this mask. And yeah, let's try to render. All right. So this is what we get. Let's compare before, after. So I don't have as much grass as I expected. So probably we need to contrast a bit more this mask. So back in the mask builder, I'm gonna disable this map distribution and I'm gonna try to contrast some values here and the slope as well. The max angle should be something around 55. Yeah, let's try again. Okay, we definitely see some more grass on the hills of that cliff, so that's pretty cool. And if we want to contrast that even more, first let's take a snapshot just to compare. Okay, definitely help. So that would be into the shader, and we could use a change range. Yep, so let's connect it. And let's change the old range max to 0.5. I'm also going to color correct the grass because I think it's a bit dark compared to the cliff, so something like 1.1. Okay, let's compare. And yeah, here you go. That's much better in my opinion. Now we could also create another layer for the ground. So let's go back to the object level into the cliff and add a new mask builder. So from here, we're going to call that ground, and the name of the attribute will be ground as well. So let's enable the height and just going to push the mask to fit the ground level and add some noise contrast kind of thing to break up this perfect gradient. Let's also enable the slope, I guess. Yeah, something like that. So now that we are done, let's disable the attribute visualize. And there's one thing we set up in previous lesson, which was this AL water attributes, which create a bunch of attributes based on the water level. So in that case, it's set to 4 and gonna increase the minimum erosion. It's probably a bit too high, but let's see. So we're gonna need to call all these attributes into our shader. So I'm gonna call this Icelandic rock cliff, and let's pass it. So that would be for the ground. make some room, and we're gonna call that rock C, ground. That's a bit more explanatory. Okay, let's give it a color like red, and let's plug it. So we're gonna set that in the layer 3. So let's not forget the displacement. The only thing, minor details, there's no more slot available. So we're gonna need to create another displacement blender, and let's connect it as a base. Yep, and in layer 0, let's plug the ground displacement. So it's important to note that I think the material blender wouldn't work like this. It's just work for the displacement. And let's create a backdrop for the rock C mask. And of course, we are not going to use a max on noise. So let's get rid of it and use a scalar data. And that's going to be ground. All right, ground attribute. That's a better name. Let's plug this into the blend color and into the displacement weight, like so. So the graph is definitely getting a bit bigger. I hope it's not too confusing. Let's render that. So we definitely start to see some pretty cool texture for this ground. I think it fits a bit more the type of terrain and stuff. It's pretty subtle, but yeah, I think it will definitely help. Now, we need to deal with the water absorption. So we had this little setup from a previous lesson, and it's basically remapping the attributes from the AL water, and we're gonna feed that into a color correction. Let's apply blue color, and let's call that water absorption. So we are connecting the water to gamma into the gamma. And let's copy that onto the albedo of all the materials. Like that. Oh yeah, there's also this guy. It doesn't help making this graph less confusing, sorry. And if we render, we see this dark area in the bottom that correspond to where the water is going. So that's pretty neat. By the way, I'm pressing H to flip the render. Kind of helped me to give a new perspective on this image. So let's keep going. We're gonna apply the cliff shader to the underwater ground, and we need to copy this attribute. So we don't need the grass, but at least this one, that should help. Let's create a null output underwater ground if we need to do some scattering or something. Then make sure the material's properly assigned, and let's render. So this is what I get. It's definitely adding quite a bit of detail compared to before. Now we can even use the attributes we've been creating to scatter some legit grass, pebbles, rocks and whatnot. So if you have my course, we're gonna play with that in the next lesson.